What's up, Team Female? Welcome to Female Political Strategy. Female first, female forward, politically non-binary. I'm Ro.
I'm Lilith.
And I'm Elle. And today we're going to be talking about something that's on fire in U.S. news media. And Lilith, are you guys talking about the Don't Say Gay bill in Canada?
No, when you guys said you wanted to talk about it, I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I'll be the stand-in for the audience member who has no idea what's going on.
So Lilith and et al. Don't Say Gay. It's all over news media, it's all over TikTok, it's all over social media. And essentially what it is it's a bill that was signed into law March 28th, 2002, and it's been extremely controversial. In summary,
what's the jurisdiction of it? Like
Florida, the state of Florida. But there's a lot of copycat laws. So essentially what it is, it's public school teachers in Florida are banned from holding classroom instruction about sexual orientation or gender identity after signing the controversial bill, and it's called Parental Rights and Education Bill. So some people call it Don't Say Gay, and it was signed by Governor Ron DeSantis. And just a little bit about Ron DeSantis. He is a presidential hopeful. Everybody's eyeing him for president on the Republican ticket, but he's been the Republican conservative, hero in some ways because he has not enforced any of the COVID restrictions in the state of Florida, no mask mandates, no vaccine mandates, and now he's coming after the LGBTQ, policies by making sure.
And how's that working out in Florida? So isn't there like a ton of old people there? Didn't like a ton of people die from that?
Disney's there, or there's old people there. There's a quagmire of people there. So it's been really interesting. So
no COVID restrictions. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Sad. Weird.
And some were hurt. And so everybody's still kind of chiming in about it. Specifically the discussion of LGBTQ youth, right? So you have this issue that this population of children and youth under the age of 18 are facing higher health and suicide risks, and a lot of parents. So the issue at hand is, are these discussions something that teachers ought to have with students, or should it be left out of the classroom and left for, discussion at home?
And it only, if I'm not mistaken, it only covers young students,
Very
right?
young, it's K through 3.
To third grade. So you're talking up to 10?
K through 3. Kids aren't even thinking about sex at that age. They don't need to know that shit. Like,
well, there was...
Do I have the conservative... I'm like almost a commie. How do I have the conservative stance on this?
And that's what's very interesting about this thing, because it's very interestingly bipartisan in a very, it's a nonpartisan discussion. It's a very, Ro, would you say it's very almost like social, like it's drawn across cultural lines, not really traditionally partisan lines.
Yeah, I've seen most of the people who are criticizing it are coming down on the cultural problems with introducing queer theory to children. A lot of people, I think, across both partisans feel...
I don't think queer theory should be introduced to adults either. Like, queer theory fucking sucks. Okay? Learn that shit in college. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so there's basically two minds of it. So there's the people that see this as a ban, and a lot of people who are on the left see it as a ban on teachers who are gay or lesbian and their ability to be honest about their life with their students if they choose to share. If they say, I have a wife or I have a husband and they are of the same sex, are they going to then be in violation of this law? So they're at least positioning it as if it's like a draconian silencing of teachers who are specifically gay and lesbian or trans.
First of all, how often do you talk about your partner?
Why are you talking about your spouse to, go find a therapist, make some friends, don't talk to, the students? I mean, I don't want to make it clear where I stand on this, but I think it might come out. But, you shouldn't be talking about your sexuality, your straightness, or your gayness to children. How about that? Shapes and colors.
Yeah, even for my straight teachers, I'm trying to think, did I know anything about their relationship status, at all? No, I think I knew maybe one teacher whose husband picked her up from work one time when she was injured, and that's about the only time that I knew that any of them had a spouse at all. So
elementary school, I think I only knew maybe my 4th grade teacher was married because her husband was a firefighter, and we had a lot of fires where I was from. So
oh, okay.
But you know what I mean? It's just, why are you talking about your marital life to children?
Yeah, I get this a lot whenever I see the libs of TikTok TikToks that are like, I came out to my grade 3 students as non-binary and I taught them my pronouns and I did this and this and I talk about how I'm bisexual. It's like, your students don't need to know that you're bisexual. You can, like, they don't need to know who you date. They don't need to know about your sex life. Keep that shit to yourself. Anyways.
Exactly.
Well, okay, so the question is what does the bill actually say? And then what's the actual effect of it? Because the fear is that in the efforts to clamp down on some of the queer theory indoctrination, or people introducing some of the like gender ideology,
gender woo-woo stuff.
Well, okay, so I mean, a lot of the stuff that's been circulating on Twitter is like the gender unicorn and them like trying to map out different types of pronouns and then explain gender identity to children. And the question is like, is it the place of the school to explain what is essentially a complicated personal identity issue, or is it the parents' responsibility? And then also, does the bill restrict gays and lesbians who maybe aren't interested in talking about queer theory in their classrooms, but just want to be able to share the fact that they have a wife, or maybe they have, maybe they have a picture of their family in their desk or something like that. Is that then in violation of the bill?
So in addition to that too, something that it does impact is notification of parents when there's something that comes up with the child regarding their sexuality, right? So if a kid comes out as like gender questioning, I don't know the proper term for it, but if they are, talking about, hey, I might be gay, or I might be trans, or I might be whatever, should the teachers or school administration be required to notify the parents?
No.
Okay.
I'll talk about the case that it seems to be in response to. There's been a couple of cases in California actually where a student came out as transgender to teachers, and then the teachers started to like help them quote unquote transition. They didn't tell the parents, and then specifically the kid may not have been saying they were transgender, but just saying they were depressed. And then there was some question about whether the teachers were pushing them into transgenderism as a solution to things about them feeling uncomfortable in their body, et cetera, or feeling insecure. And then one of the students actually committed suicide. And so, so the parents of that student and another student who I don't believe committed suicide, but like the parent found out that the school had completely transitioned the child during the school day without the parents' knowledge. They came in and they were outraged. They're like, this is materially important information that should have been shared with me. The teacher shouldn't have the power to make these kinds of decisions
it's like social transitioning.
Make these kinds of decisions for my child. Yeah, social transitioning without informing me. Right? Like that they're using different pronouns.
Mm-hmm. And using alternative pronouns. Yeah.
That they've changed their name. All of those things are what parents would consider to be part of their rights as a parent to be informed about. So that's a contentious issue. I'm not actually sure how I completely feel.
Okay, yeah. I think that's fair for parents to want to know about things like social transition and that sort of stuff. I think actually I've seen a lot about this on Twitter about how like the idea of keeping secrets from parents is actually very problematic. Creating that like kind of, I mean, yeah, there are some parents that are abusive and all that, and there needs to be a safety plan for. Like, here's the thing: if you feel like the child is in danger, if the parents find out that they're gay or trans, you should probably call like CPS or something. Like if you think they're actually physically in danger. If it's just like going to be an uncomfortable conversation for them, maybe, then yeah, the parents should probably know about it. But stuff like, if the child is like gay and like has a boyfriend or whatever at school, I don't think the teachers should be like required to tell, to snitch on the kid. You know what I mean? But if it's something like, transitioning, probably should know that. Yeah.
So this isn't like a mandatory reporting bill, right? All it's saying is how should, the conversation of sex be held with regard. It should be introduced in a developmentally appropriate way. And this removes K through 3, that discussion. First of all, like 9 years old and below, why are we talking about sex? They don't need to know about sex. And above that, though, like there are developmentally appropriate ways. I mean, you're talking about puberty starting in like as young as 5th grade and through middle school, right? And then you have sexual relations. I mean, you have high schoolers that are engaging in sexual activity. So if it's developmentally appropriate and not socially pushing a narrative that some would argue is the queer agenda. I think that's something that parents need to be a part of. And if a student is talking about bisexuality or being trans, it's one thing. But if they are legitimately saying, hey, call me by this name, but don't tell my parents I go by this name, but call me this pronoun, don't tell my parents, and it makes it very awkward at parent-teacher conference time. It's just, I feel like...
I'm reading the actual text. So here's the actual text so people can see what it says verbatim. So lines 82 through 96, and this is from the Miami Herald. A school district may not adopt procedures or student support forms that prohibit school district personnel from notifying a parent about his or her student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being, or a change related to services or monitoring, or that encourage or have the effect of encouraging a student to withhold from a parent such information. School district personnel may not discourage or prohibit parental notification of and involvement in critical decisions affecting a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. This subparagraph does not prohibit a school district from adopting procedures that permit school personnel to withhold such information from a parent if a reasonably prudent person would believe that disclosure would result in abuse, abandonment, or neglect. So essentially they're saying that they can't withhold it unless they have reasonable suspicion that this is going to result in abuse or neglect of the student.
Endanger the child, yeah. So I
mean, so it's not like a mandatory reporting bill. It's just saying you can't discourage, like you can't like on purpose keep secrets from parents.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. And again, this seems reactionary to this California case where the students or the teachers actually conspired and followed students' private accounts to figure out which students might be gay or transgender to like try to privately talk to them outside of
like that was the one where the husband was in IT and was like leaking to the teacher like their internet search results and stuff.
Yeah,
that one was fucking creepy though. Damn, it's
really fucked up. Yeah, so this again seems like kind of reactionary against that case as well as the Twitter account Libs of TikTok, if people have been following that, which has been following a lot of teachers who have publicly put on their TikTok and on their Instagram and on their Twitter, like the desire to put queer theory into their curriculum. And like, they'll say things explicitly like, I'm trying to inject queerness into my classroom, right?
I'm trying to queer my classroom. No, stop that. Stop being a fucking weirdo. God.
Well, there also, in addition to that, there was the leak of the Disney executive meeting where there was, I guess, producers or directors that were talking about queer theory and queer concepts being put in movies. And there was an actual person that was like, I put queerness wherever I can find it. I put representation everywhere, every chance possible, which, and
I mean, it's fine to have characters in Disney movies that are like same-sex couples and that kind of stuff. What I'm talking about with the queer stuff is like, there's all those TikToks and stuff of like creepy ass teachers being like, I wear high heels to school. So like as a man, so that they know that this classroom is queer friendly, or, constantly talking about their sexual orientation and their pronouns and like, I'm, mentally this, but I'm attracted to this. And like the genderbread, the genderbread diagram, like talking about that kind of stuff. I'm like, it's just a lot. It's just a bit much.
Well, it's religious almost. And that's kind of my argument, and why I'm more or less, I guess I'll take the position that I think that it seems to be fairly reasonable. First of all, assert that parents have a right to guide their children on topics of sexuality and sexual ethics outside of, just basic biological information that you get part of any sex and health class. I think this comes down to being a sexual ethic that ultimately teachers don't necessarily have the right to put onto children.
Especially since the people with these views also tend to be pro-porn, pro-prostitution, sex work is work, being a prostitute is empowering, that kind of people. I don't want people with those sorts of values educating kids. Okay, that shit's grooming.
Christians had their time with this too, and the Christians were smacked back too, because there was a lot of abstinence-only education, or like trying to inject certain types of purity ring stuff. Yeah, you're not really supposed to be putting... A lot of people feel like the ethics, narratives, the ethics of sexuality should be left up to individual parents, right? And rather than like the schools being responsible for teaching sexual ethic. The only thing the school should be teaching is the actual act itself, and then biological functions. Everything around that is cultural, in which case everybody has their own culture. And so they're going to come, their group is going to come with their own cultural values to interpret things outside of the science.
And developmentally appropriate is, I think, the most important part of all of this. Where are you talking about objective sexual acts to children? Or are you talking, like, when I say children, I mean 10 years old and below. Prepubescent children should not be talking about the objective acts of sex. But, at high school, where you have 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and you bring up objectively the realities of sex, right? Where you have what sex is, what the consequences are, what the social consequences are, what the economic consequences are. Because at that point, I mean, you're talking about a reality where you're saying, hey, if you don't have sex, you don't have babies. If you don't have babies, you don't have a child you're responsible for, right? That's the consequences of abstinence. But what I'm against is creating this funnel of, hey, sex is good, sex is bad. And once you, like you said, once you moralize sex, now you're taking on the job of the parent. It's the parents to create those moral foundations. So another component of this bill that I think I'd like to highlight is a very interesting one. I'd like your thoughts on it too, that the parents would have a right to opt their children out of counseling and health services. So each school district shall notify parents of each healthcare service offered at their student's school and the option to withhold consent or decline any specific service. So,
what do they mean by that? Like, meaning if they need mental help? I mean, that's already the case, isn't it?
Kind of. So I think this explicitly...
Like taking your child out of therapy, that's kind of fucked up, actually. I don't know if I agree with that.
School. So that's school-sponsored services, right? So you have... This provision would require schools to create an opt-out procedure for mental and physical healthcare services, which would include individual counseling, support groups. I'm actually personally kind of not impacted by it, but it hits home. So in our school, we had like Gay Straight Alliance, which I think now is called Queer Straight Alliance or something like that. Like groups like that where it's a circle for students to support each other in their sexual identity. I think those groups would be impacted.
I mean, yeah, we had a Gay Straight Alliance too, and this was like queer theory taking over. Back then it was actual. I'd be curious to see what the Gay Straight Alliance clubs are like now, with all the like blue-haired, like, demisexual. Oh, I'm demisexual. Like, all the like straight queer people. You know what I mean? Like, I'd be curious to see how those groups are, especially with, given how like hostile there are to actual lesbians now, like lesbians who are exclusively same-sex attractive. They're called like TERFs. I'd be curious to see what those groups are like now, if they're actually as nice and inclusive as I remember them being when I was a kid. But, that's one thing.
Well, that's been the, I guess, the work of Libs of TikTok has been exposing not only just the teachers, but a lot of, unfortunately, the kids that have been posting a lot of their more extremist gender ideology or gender beliefs online. They'll talk about like, just basically making up pronouns or being encouraged to see themselves as transgender because they don't like traditional things of their same sex. So it's now become sort of a training ground, or it's become a subculture. Well, it's like a subculture in the same way like emo was with kids, right? Because, and I have to say, this has been across the board from my friends and family who are teachers. They're talking about like everyone's trans now, and like they sort of roll their eyes because they're like, a small percentage of these kids may or may not go on to be trans as adults, but for the vast majority of the kids, a lot of them are depressed. They don't fit in. They don't feel like they have meaning or purpose, and so they join this group because it helps them, because first of all, it's they're appropriating oppression in some respects because they already feel depressed and disaffected. So then like having this thing to say, well, you're oppressed or you feel depressed because you don't fit gender stereotypes because you're trans, etc. So they have a bunch of kids that like might have just in our generation like listened to emo music and like dye their hair.
Yeah, in my time, it was like, my parents just don't understand. Exactly. They would just be all angsty.
Yeah.
And just be like, there were other ways that they would express their angst rather than being like, I am literally oppressed as an emo. Society is against me.
And they called conformists, like like the goth kids were Gen X and they were called like conformists, etc. Or the people that were non-goth were conformists. So my friends that are teachers have all said the same thing. And just to be clear, this is almost exclusively like a white thing. Like, because my friends that work in like minority schools, this shit's not happening. This is just like straight up like bored white suburban kids. This is why it seems like a cultural fad.
I think I would say it's not just, it's a white culture thing. Because I also don't think this is happening in like the sticks of Mississippi. I mean, it might be like one or two, but it's very much so like a suburban, life is so good, but I'm still not at the top.
It's very
like
middle
somewhere
class,
in the middle.
yeah.
Like it's cultural. It's very cultural, like middle child syndrome, right? Like
that's a good way to describe it.
Culturally middle child syndrome. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, it's like we're clearly not rich, but like there's nothing wrong with my life that like is kind of detrimental or attention grabbing. So I'm going to create problems.
And it's not that there's not queer students or gay students in minority schools, but it's not like a whole subculture that makes them feel like they're basing their entire identity around it, right? Like the identity portion of it seems to be specifically bored white middle class kids, and it's the same demographic that was in the emo, like in our generation too. It's not, and so what's worrisome about it is that this is a little bit different because instead of just telling them to like whatever, get a eyebrow piercing and some rage belts, they're telling
like dye your hair black or whatever.
Dye your hair black. Some of these kids are looking to medically transition. And since the science around medical transition is up in the air, no matter what anybody else says, it's not conclusive based on everything available. It's a little bit concerning to see that some children might be being pressured into making gender transition choices that may or may not be reversible.
Yeah, like you know what kids in my day used to get that was like irreversible was getting like their ears stretched, like their
ears, gauging,
right? Like
yeah, go get some double zeros, like a real. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, so like in my day, you know, the irreversible bodily modifications that the kids would make, or they'd get like an illegal tattoo, or like a septum piercing or an eyebrow piercing or something like that. Now there's kids that are getting their fucking dick and balls cut off, or they're getting their like
mastectomies and
the double mastectomies.
It's actually sad.
It's actually really tragic for a lot of these people. Yeah, like right, and it's like permanently affecting their fertility and just overall quality of life,
and puberty blockers, etc. So,
or giving them osteoporosis with the puberty blockers and stuff like that. It's actually messed up.
So I feel like people are seeing all of this, and then like the conservatives this is almost like a slam dunk easy thing for them to position themselves culturally against, right? Because you're like, yes, I'm against child transition. I'm against them hiding material information about their child's sexuality from their parents. I'm against them hiding anything that might be affecting their physical, mental, emotional health from their parents. And I'm also against adults talking to small kids about their sex and sexuality and gender identity and gender ideologies when they're too young to understand, or because it's a cultural.
So one concern, actually, sorry, bring it back to the part about how the parents could.
Seems like a slam dunk, though, right? Like that seems like fairly reasonable positions.
Yeah, it does seem like a pretty slam dunk, like a fairly reasonable. That's the thing. Like I'm pissed off that this is being framed as like the conservative position, because this just seems like common sense. But I want to talk about the therapy thing, because that is making my spidey senses tingle a little bit. Like my parents, for example, my parents were very toxic, and one thing that was really important for me in my teen years was having access to school counselors, right? And the school counselors at my schools were very important to me, like recovering from their fucked up situation and, you know, becoming a well-adjusted adult. I'm concerned that there's going to be like actual like abusive parents that are going to take advantage of this law and pull their kids out of just normal therapy, like unrelated to sex, sexuality, anything like that, and just like pull their kids out of therapy just to isolate and abuse them.
And you know, that's such a sad, and you know, it is problematic, and I hate that the Overton window has shifted so far to the left, where you're literally like, can I please talk about my trans non-binary, you know, problem set and call any girl that's going through a tomboy phase a trans person? Like, that shouldn't be the left versus right issue at hand, right? So I think this is just a consequence of how radicalized our problems have become.
Or polarized.
It's just a consequence of just the most radical concepts are all that's up for debate. And really, it's just like, hey, keep your dick and tits and chromosomes out of my child. Like, we took cursive out of the curriculum. Like, no one, right, Ro? Like, if I'm not mistaken, it's across the country, writ large, kids aren't learning cursive because it's too complex. But somehow they can entertain LGBTQIA, the alphabet theory. No, thank you. I'm vehemently opposed to that.
I feel like, again, when they're really young, they're still figuring themselves out. So like, I think the only thing that would be concerning is like, let's say that you do have a child that's trans, and like, so can the teachers not talk about it, or like, how is that allowed to be talked about in the classroom? Once again, it's not as if like they're prepubescent, but now there's a big push to trans children who are prepubescent before they go through puberty, because they're arguing that puberty is like,
well, they did say like developmentally appropriate, right?
I have a solution, actually. I think that a better solution, rather instead of this law, would be to pay teachers better, because I feel like the reason why you have these insane activist teachers is because of how poorly teachers are paid. The only type of people who would be drawn to a job that pays you, the only type of person who would be drawn
Doreen,
to
the dog
a
walker.
job that requires an education but pays you $30,000 a year is someone who has an agenda, okay? So if you want more normal, well-adjusted teachers, then you have to pay them normal, well-adjusted wages.
Oh my gosh.
Privatize the workforce. No, I actually do support that. I think that's one of my like leftist views. I don't have leftist views. I have leftist like sympathies.
I don't even see that as leftist. That's just like basic law. That's just as this is the conservative position, but I consider it common sense. Paying your teachers a living wage shouldn't even be a left-right thing. That should just be a common sense thing.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, if you're conservative, wouldn't you want the people educating your children to be not a fucking idiot, right? Like, or not a...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where they leave for the private sector.
Exactly. You'd want someone who is just a normal person and not like a person with an agenda, right? These are the sort of people where like, oh, I don't do it for the money. I do it for the, whatever, emotional.
Maybe you should do it for the money.
Yeah, like, again, like me as a salesperson, I don't understand people who are not motivated by money. Like, I don't get it. The only mentality that I know is being motivated by money. And so when people are like, oh, I don't do this for the money. Oh, I do this because it makes me happy or whatever, or because it like gives me, I can't even come up with the words to describe what they're thinking because I don't understand it. So
the fact that we have to legislate this is very problematic to me and indicative of like social decay. And you're right. I think that has something to do with the fact that like my thing is
they're paid pennies.
They're paid almost nothing. I mean, you have school administrators that are very, very highly overpaid. So you have like school administrators that are on average making, upwards of like 80, 90.
They're also mostly male, so that's also part of it. So this is another place where I think, so compared to women, like this is another place where the workforce and the distribution of the workforce is very gendered, and you can also see that in the pay discrepancy.
That's really interesting because where I grew up, men and women were evenly distributed, but I can see that. But yeah, I think the only weird part is that this has to be a legislation in the first place.
Yeah, it should just be common sense to not talk about sex with your grade 3s and under, right? The whole idea of like a trans child is like insane to me. It's been said.
It sounds like child abuse.
It sounds like child abuse. It sounds like Munchausen's by proxy, right? Like kids that age, like just let them, like if he's a boy and he wants to wear it, just let him play in the dress. If it's a girl, she wants to play with like little Tonka trucks or whatever, just let her play with the Tonka trucks. You don't have to put them on puberty blockers.
Imagine your tomboy phase and that one obsession with Barbie dolls gets you transitioned, and now suddenly you're like a chick with like a high testosterone count. Only because like you like to,
or just like a dude with tits, like because your parents were like, oh, you
Congrats.
Like to play with Barbies? Oh, I'm gonna immediately put you on estrogen. I was a tomboy right up until the age of 14, right? If I'd been born 5 years later, I probably would have been transitioned. Okay, so
holy crap.
So school superintendents are 87% male. Principals are like 50-50. Those other ones, like some of the lower level quote administrator jobs are 50-50 male and female, but like the actual school board, 87,
and that's a national
80+% male. Yep.
Yikes. Okay. So yeah, I mean, the discrepancy is worth noting. This is just a very interesting time where a lot of social issues are swinging from the moral right. And I think the pendulum at one point hung out in the middle for a second, and now swinging to what I would call like the moral left, right? Where you're imposing social ethical values that are distinctly moralistic, but coming from a very predominantly left perspective. And I don't think, moralizing belongs in grade schools.
And that scares me as an I hate to use the word like ex-Christian. It feels like so definitive. Like, but it's scary.
Were you fundamentalist? Like, was your family?
Yeah, they were fundamentalist, evangelical, all of that.
Okay.
So I'll say a non-practicing Christian. I don't know how I believe at this point. I just like refuse to unpack my beliefs because I don't want to spend that much time on it. But like as a non-practicing former Christian, I guess, it really, really concerns me seeing, the pendulum swing all the way left, because yes, you're seeing like the exact same tactics that were used by the right within my lifetime now being adopted by the left, and then use them making it seem like it's a moral position to take and that they're justified in using some of these same underhanded tactics that the right used to use. For example, I remember like when prayer in school was like a huge culture war touch point issue, where it was like they should be allowed to pray in school, they shouldn't be allowed to pray in school, the school can't stop you from praying, etc. And
under
there's like
God,
under God, yeah, and like the role of
was teaching evolution a controversy? Was that a thing for you too?
That was at one point.
They tried it. That one didn't really catch.
And then to like expand the discussion out, I think we had started talking about Disney. There was a time when the right was really weaponizing corporations, things like Hobby Lobby, Chick-fil-A, against certain types of cultural issues. And now you're seeing the left try to do that with Disney. And I'm very upset with the concept of using corporations to override democracy. Because I'm like, everybody gets one vote. Everybody gets one vote. You don't say like, I have one vote.
There's something coercive about it.
It is, isn't it?
It's coercive, yeah.
I'm not saying that Disney can't take a position, but the fact that they were literally and explicitly told to come out with a statement against the specific law and then weaponize their power because they're an economic powerhouse in Florida to try to get this law repealed. Like, it feels really, really like an obstruction of democracy.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly have something very deeply personal about entities that can't vote speaking on political issues. I think that should be one of the things where if you're getting tax credits and tax incentives for not being a person, for being a business, because they get shielded from the tax liabilities that an average person would have, right? You don't get a say in politics. That's kind of a weird stance that I have, where religious organizations, 501c3s, and corporations.
If you don't pay taxes, or if you get tax credits.
Yeah. Like if you get tax incentives.
You don't get to have a political opinion.
You're a business. Yeah.
If you get tax incentives, I mean, and I'm not saying that and votes, right? Like a corporation can't vote. So what are you doing in politics?
Advancing their own interests, maximizing their interests.
Wink.
And to talk about this, Hobby Lobby weaponized their company against birth control. And then Chick-fil-A weaponized their company against the gay marriage laws. Yeah. So this is a time when it was done by the right, and it's
wrong then and it's wrong now.
Not even that long ago, maybe 10 years ago. Yeah, it's wrong then, it's wrong now.
I like that. Look at it. So that's what I mean by this is interestingly not partisan, but it's cultural, where you're seeing people that are coming out, and it's not even, does queerness belong it's not just does queerness belong in the classroom, it's does moralizing belong in the classroom. It was weird when the Christians did it, and now it's queer. It's queer. It's weird when the left is doing it. And I'm not even saying that as a conservative. I'm saying that just as an American that, wants to be a parent in the public school system.
Yeah. And it's scary because, again, as a person who grew up during the rise of the cultural Christian right, and who has a lot of battle scars from some of their institutions, I'm afraid that if the left just goes, pushes the pendulum too far left, that the backlash in the right will be severe, because the Christian right was a response to the excesses of the 60s and 70s, right? So, and then a lot of that had to do with, again, some of the extremist things that were happening, like actual leftist terrorists, et cetera, in addition to some of the questionable sexual morality that went on. A lot of women have come out and talked about like the sexual abuse, the trafficking, the drugs. There's a lot of people that actually converted to Christianity who used to be heavy into the leftist culture, who were called Jesus freaks, that basically they were Christians who converted from like extreme leftist ideology, and they kind of helped to push, they're not as like prominent as like the Christian right, but like just having a lot of these independents who were Christians and swinging more towards the conservative side helped to just keep Christian conservatives having a chokehold on politics for a very long time. So I'm a little bit concerned that like the reactionary politics that you're seeing bubbling up in response to some of the interjection of cultural values that other people don't agree with into children, because people are very protective of their children, rightfully so, right? Like I think people would roll their eyes at a company that was doing it, but if you're talking about doing it at their public school, that's when people get angry, right? So you're seeing that happen. What, you know, where's the limit with the cultural left, and then what's the backlash going to be? Because like you're seeing it happen and it's a little bit scary, because I'm like, oh, I don't want to be, we're already talking about like how they're, you know, pushing forth all these like anti-abortion laws, but then a lot of bills are going to be on the ballot come midterms that are going to be concerning queer theory, and then secondarily like critical race theory, and then it might be draconian. The response might be draconian.
So which leads us to, I mean, what are we looking at here, right? I think what conversations
what the fuck is going on?
What the fuck? In all seriousness, like our economy.
Yeah, we're confused. Russian bots. It's Russian bots.
It is the Russian bots. I mean, the Russian bots won. So look, here we are. Oh my God. There's this clip I want to find and put it in here, where this lady was talking about, we need to teach children about masturbation. It's really important that we talk to kids about masturbation. Like, there's no age that's too young to discuss masturbation. And when you
yes, there is. God. Oh my God. Okay.
I know. Yeah. And God is my witness. And so what this is doing is like misinformation has made reality and the information environment so fungible that they've now morphed it back to, you know, these insane extremist thoughts where we're actually having a discussion, a real adult sane discussion about whether or not we should talk to children about masturbation. It's like, no, we should not. Like, if they're doing something and it's like in context, okay, but no, we should not be encouraging child sexual behavior. That is what we call grooming. They are normalizing grooming behavior in some, like, that dialogue is starting to increase. So my thing is, how do we have a normal discussion around things and not it divulgent, like turn into, hey, like child masturbation is a good thing? And, you know, how do we reframe the conversation?
So the left has taken the position that kids are learning about this somewhere anyways. And so they always think that, I think their knee-jerk reaction is that more education is better than less education. Whereas I've come to see the right as saying that like it's not a given that kids are going to learn about this somewhere, and that you might be introducing it to them at ages that are too young to be appropriate, and therefore it's harmful for them, or you're influencing them in ways that we don't necessarily approve of. And that is a difficult conversation, because I think we've been on both sides of that, because we've talked about like them putting BDSM in like teen magazines, and that feeling like very much like, okay, I don't think 13, 14, 15-year-olds
learning about anal sex,
should be in any way, shape, or form learning about anal sex,
getting choked during sex,
BDSM. I feel like in that case, it's very clear that they're introducing an adult topic to children, but then Teen Vogue claps back like, kids are learning about this from porn and the internet. Somebody has to be able to talking to them about it.
Yeah, it's called their parents. It's their parents.
I would support porn critical sex education, like similar to what Gail Dines does with Culture Reframed. So yeah, I do think that kids need some kind of sexual education, but it needs to be like instead of being like, oh, well, kids are learning this from porn, we should just teach it to them before they learn it from porn.
Yeah, introduce
You know what I mean? Like that, we should teach them all the porn shit before they learn it from porn. You know what I mean? Like that's what's fucked up. They should teach porn critical.
They're like, we just want to teach them how to have how to be choked out safely and have anal sex at 14 safely. And it's like,
teach, like, I think more importantly, you need to teach girls like that.
Say no. Yeah.
It's not okay.
Yeah. That their pleasure and their boundaries matter, you know? So like that, like relationship should make you happy. They shouldn't be toxic, you know, that sort of stuff. We didn't learn about that sort of stuff when I was doing sex ed.
Or also bringing the parents into the conversation. I don't understand why this is a teacher on student, like a solely teacher on student silo. This should be like a community conversation where we're bringing the parents into it and just saying, hey, look, this is what's going on with your students. We're seeing rampant uptick in, porn coming across our networks, because you can see what's coming across the Wi-Fi networks, or you can have like jammers in the school or whatever. But bring the parents into it and just say, hey, this is what we plan to do. What do you think? And have a parental, like, the parents be a part of parenting their children. The teachers are not there to make, upstanding citizens. They're there to have intellectually informed citizens. In the US, our literacy rate isn't even top 30 in the world.
Yeah. No, I'm kidding.
Not even top 50. And we want to talk about like sex, trans, and BDSM and like transitioning pronouns, and critical race theory. And it's just like, why don't we start with like teaching our kids how to read?
I feel like, well, it could go back to the fact that it takes advanced level courses to teach that kind of stuff. And if teachers aren't getting paid
to read or sex?
No, like mathematics and stuff like that, like advanced level literature, right? Versus like elementary education.
Oh no, we're not even there yet. We're talking about like K through 5. They're not reading at grade level.
And yeah, so it's really tough because our education system is so decentralized compared to other places too. I was like marveling like how they do education in the UK, and I was like, oh no, what you learn in the United States could be completely different depending on what state you grew up in, what county you grew up in. You could learn. Yeah,
you don't have like A levels, and then surprise, we all take SATs or ACTs if you'd like. Like you don't even have to do that. So yeah, it's very. I'm all for. Like when I was younger, I didn't, no child is going to want like their parents micromanaging them, but parents are trying to raise their children for the most part, right? Are there bad parents out there? Sure. But for the most part, parents care. Parents don't want their children exposed to things intentionally. And they have a lifestyle, they have a paradigm they're trying to raise their kids under. And for students and for teachers in, the school system to undermine that, I think that's criminal. And that goes both ways. I don't want religion being taught in schools. If I'm raising my kid agnostic, I don't want them learning about the Bible or Jesus if they're not going to a private school. So why are they learning about adult concepts?
Can I wrap this up? I have a funny anecdote about all the like fundy kids that we went to school, fundamental kids. Okay.
Fundies, yeah.
They got a fun nickname.
So I went to school in an area where there was like one like Christian school and like 3 normal schools. And sometimes we'd like compete against each other for sports and stuff. And it was just sort of a thing that all the fundy, we called them the fundy kids because they were like insane. I'm sorry, but like,
I don't have any comment because it's like a little bit.
Roche is making fun
I'm
of you.
Not making fun of you personally.
It is a little bit insane. The things I learned as part of evangelical Christianity, in hindsight, some of them were fully insane. And part of, I ended up being an FDSer. All right, like it gave me some issues. Okay, like
now you're here. Look at us. We're all here now. So what does this say about our upbringing?
So like there was this thing where apparently like you couldn't teach creationism or like, okay, so you had to learn evolution in school. Like that's part of like the school curriculum, like provincially in like elementary school, like classrooms. And so there was this whole thing with like the fundy school not wanting to teach kids evolution and wanting to teach creationism instead. And it was like a whole thing where like, why is it in the normal schools they don't allow you to teach creationism, but like, at our school, we aren't allowed to teach creationism. Why do we have to teach evolution? Why is it part of the curriculum? And yada, yada, yada. And so, yeah, we all just made jokes about, basically like the fundy kids were the butt of every joke. I'm not even kidding. Like they were the one weird school. We joked about how they didn't get a complete education, basically. And so I feel bad because kids are mean, okay? Like kids are like mean as fuck to each other. It's not even their.
You guys are the nicest bullies ever. Ha ha ha, you guys are undereducated. Like that's some like primo stereotypical Canadian bullying.
Very nice Canadian bullying.
Ha ha ha, your parents don't love you. You're undereducated.
Not just that, but
where I got called like an African booty scratcher. Like
you won't be able to get into one of our very fine public education institutions. Ha ha.
Right, what are they you guys don't even meet provincial standards. Like I got called an African booty scratcher. Okay. Like,
yeah, no, that wouldn't fly in our schools.
That's what was going on in public school.
That shit would like make the papers and like that was if someone said like there was like
the papers.
There was a story of like a girl calling another girl the N-word or something, and it made it to like the local newspaper, right? Like that's just not something that happened.
Oh man.
Like okay.
Canada's a giant farm town, I swear. Except for Toronto. Toronto's insane.
I did grow up in a pretty like actually pretty good neighborhood, so I mean it's like it is what it is. But so we've what I'm saying though is like all these gender woo-woo kids that are learning from their teachers about like pronouns and like the genderbread nonsense, and but my gender identity is different from my sex. They're kind of like the fundy kids, like they're the new fundy kids.
They are.
Like they're the ones that are the butt of every joke.
They're gonna grow up and they're gonna be angry and resentful because life's not gonna reflect the ideology they were taught.
Exactly. So I feel bad for them.
People aren't going to, that's what it comes down to. And I feel like this law is probably some reasonable protections against quote unquote indoctrination against these, again, very contentious, not completely scientifically sound ideologies that mostly are coming out of humanities. I guess the difference between, once again, an ideology versus like scientific fact is like if you can recreate and prove these kinds of things. And this isn't a realm where they're keeping actual science out of the schools. Like in the case of evolution, they're trying to prevent them from being introduced to ideas that are as of yet unproven and are based on various kinds of belief systems and ethics ideas that have come out of humanities professions, which I think is quite different than saying, even if you were to talk about like transgenderism or something like that, and you were to talk about it in the context of biology, you would have to keep it grounded in some kind of science, but that's not what they're doing. They're not keeping it grounded in science. So
it's narrative setting. And that's not to say anything. This isn't either, like, I'm not blaming the community either. Like, this isn't a trans problem or a gay problem, because there's a lot of gay parents and trans adults that are like, hey, I don't want to teach kids this. So this isn't really like about the members of those specific communities. It's about the education system and the conversations that are being had with children, and should this be taught to students, right? So really wanted to draw that line before labels get thrown around.
Yeah. I'm all for like representation and thinking representation matters maybe in the wider culture, but I think specifically with schools, it's stick to the facts. Like that's just don't.
Yeah, this is about children. It's about kids. So with that being said, that's the subject, and we'll post some relevant links below.
Thanks for listening, Queens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wrong show, Lilith.
Oh wait, this isn't it.
Feel very offended.
Nope. I mean, they can still be queens. Team female.
Team female. All right. So thanks for listening, Team Female. Check us out on Twitter at Female Political and our Patreon, patreon.com/Female Political Strategy. And check us out on Facebook. You can check out our Facebook link in the show notes below. Until next week.
Bye.
See ya. All right.
Bye.
Cool.